Hello, my good friends. Welcome to a new series where we'll be going through Chris Beaumont's masterful dissertation, Defending an Anarchist Society, determining whether anarchism can maintain its viability as a revolutionary theory within the scope and context of whether an established anarchist society is sufficiently capable of defending itself against external military aggression. This video will establish the tone of the series as we explore both the abstract and the introduction to his work. Abstract. Anarchism, when applied consistently, provides structures allowing for highly advantageous strategies when defending society, making anarchist social structures capable of defense against external invasion when fully established. I used Gray's 17 core dimensions of military strategy as a framework for what determines strategic success, what I called authoritarian communism, as a benchmark for successful strategy when defending a revolutionary society, and Kropotkin's anarcho-communism as a framework for an established anarchism. Comparing authoritarian communist strategies to the strategies implementable under a fully established anarchist society in a context where the survival of the society is at stake, anarchist structures are more strategically advantageous in 16 of the dimensions while still proving capable regarding the 17th dimension. Because of the defensive successes of authoritarian communism, anarchist structures being more advantageous than authoritarian communism in this context gives theoretical grounding for maintaining that an anarchist society could sufficiently defend itself against military aggression. Demonstrating that anarchist societies are theoretically defensible provides a strong counter to the intuition that anarchist societies would be doomed to fall under external aggression if implemented. Therefore, the research maintains anarchism's viability as a revolutionary theory within this context. Moreover, because the research focuses on anarchism and its survivability against neighbouring states, this research provides a strong contribution to anarchist international relations theory which, because of anarchism's neglect in larger international relations discussions, means this research also strongly contributes to international relations theory as a whole. Introduction. In order to survive, a society must defend itself against aggression. It should be expected that a society unable to defend itself would eventually be conquered. If an anarchist society is viable, it must be capable of defending itself against military aggression. However, given anarchism is an often revolutionary philosophy which rejects authority, and militaries traditionally follow a command hierarchy and are therefore authoritarian, it seems doubtful that an anarchist society has the capacity to defend itself against a state military and would therefore be indefensible and therefore unviable as a model for a revolutionary society. Hart defines strategy as applying military means to the end of policy. For anarchist defense, this means knowing what is required for defense and having the means to execute it. Fully answering whether anarchist social structures are capable of effective defense therefore means answering the following questions. 1. What is needed for a sufficient anarchist defense? 2. Is anarchism capable of achieving these needs? However, current literature addressing anarchist defense fails to answer these questions, partially because little is written on the topic, but also because the few existing works answer very little. Taylor notes that historically, non-state societies, although internally stable, are usually destroyed by state conquest. Kropotkin echoes this reasoning, observing that self-organizing mutual aid societies, such as village communities, lasted centuries, but were destroyed by state aggression. Woods also highlights how the anarchist revolution in the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s would have defeated fascism, but was destroyed after being betrayed by the Stalinists. This seemingly confirms the intuition that anarchist societies cannot defend themselves. However, these accounts simply highlight that these societies were destroyed, not whether they were incapable of defense. These societies could have made the wrong choices. It also doesn't confirm that no anarchist society could ever be defensible. Others may succeed in the future. Anarchism's record of failure, although potentially problematic, doesn't provide sufficient answers. Supporting evidence for anarchist defense is also uninformative. Regarding the Spanish anarchists during the Civil War, Alexander highlights how Orwell held that the anarchist militias could have improved their efficiency whilst retaining trade union control, meaning centralization wasn't needed for efficiency. Marshall also noted how Orwell held that the anarchists were the best fighters amongst the purely Spanish forces. Dolgoff highlights how Trotsky conceded that the Spanish anarchist fighters were superior to the Russian proletariat. Gelderloos observes other anarchist successes. For example, the Ukrainian anarchists achieve highly organized and mobile combat when fighting the USSR, making defeating the Ukrainians difficult for the Bolsheviks. The Mapuche defended their society for centuries against the Spanish, being conquered in 1865, with the Mapuche's decentralized structures proving advantageous compared to the more authoritarian Aztecs, who were defeated much sooner because they would surrender after the loss of a leader or capital. These accounts of successful strategies employed by anarchists are encouraging for anarchism. However, despite their successes, these societies all eventually lost. Therefore, there are no accounts of whether anarchism in the face of state aggression is able to sufficiently defend itself. Moreover, these works are largely historically based, and although potentially informative, alone, they don't meaningfully answer the question about how well an anarchist society could defend itself. I am analysing anarchism's defensive capabilities in the abstract. This is therefore a theoretical rather than historical research. Therefore, although potentially useful, the writing directly addressing this topic cannot provide sufficient findings. The paucity of work directly addressing this topic and the broad theoretical nature of the research means this research will be more similar to an extended theoretical essay rather than a traditional research. This will provide a more open structure, allowing me to fully address this issue, despite the broad theoretical scope and lack of direct source material. Therefore, the research will be structured as follows. Part 1. Needs. I will first define anarchism as the dismantling of illegitimate hierarchy in pursuit of equality and freedom, and assert Kropotkin's mutual aid principle as a practicable means of achieving freedom and equality. This will lead me to argue that anarcho-communism acts as an example of a society which successfully dismantles hierarchy based on freedom and equality, therefore justifying anarcho-communism as the basis for an established anarchism. I will then pose the issue that historically, anarchism has failed to defend itself against aggression, contrasting this with the successes of what I will call authoritarian communism, therefore arguing that for communism to be considered a viable revolutionary practice, anarchism must prove at least as defensible as authoritarian communism. To establish how an anarchist society would coordinate against aggression, I will then outline the institutional framework of an established anarchism as bottom-up, decentralized, direct, democratic institutions based on free association. I will show how this is implemented in industry through industrial committees and apply this framework to defense, therefore establishing the mutual aid militia, defense forces based locally on democratically appointed commanders, and large-scale operations being coordinated by strategic committee. This will establish the organizational forms available to anarchism and indicate what must be achieved to defend the society, namely, repelling the enemy and the preservation of these anarchist social relations. I will then argue that because anarchism must prove at least as defensively viable as authoritarian communism to be considered sufficiently defensible, anarchist structures must be analysed in isolation against authoritarian communism to determine what strategic impacts both these structures have on a society. Anarchism will be compared with authoritarian communism based on Gray's 17 core strategic dimensions. Therefore, anarchism, in the context of military defence, must prove just as or more advantageous than authoritarian communism in regards to all these dimensions to be considered defensively viable. I will then outline how advantage or disadvantage will be established, arguing that because of the paucity of direct evidence, the analysis will be open to a variety of evidence, while allowing for a degree of interpretation to ensure sufficient analysis. Part 1 will therefore answer the first question. Anarchism needs to repel invaders and preserve its institutions. To be sufficiently capable of this, anarchism must prove that within Gray's 17 core dimensions, it is either just as or more advantageous than authoritarian communism when defending a society against aggression. Part 2. Capabilities Analysis. Part 2 will outline each strategic dimension, and I will from this interpret what defensive success regarding each dimension entails. Based on the social structures of anarchism and authoritarian communism, I will describe which strategies can best be used by each social structure. Whichever social structure is most capable of successful strategy is granted the advantage in that dimension. Following analysis of the dimensions, I will summarize the findings in the discussion chapter, therefore allowing me to determine whether anarchism indeed succeeds in comparison to authoritarian communism, therefore determining whether anarchism is capable of sufficient defense and therefore answering the second question. If anarchism proves successful, I will address why the historical record doesn't reflect this, therefore allowing for a fuller account of anarchism's defensive capabilities and therefore viability in this respect. I will then reflect on the significance of the research and how further study could build on the findings. That brings us to an end of this first video. If you'd like to see more, please remember to subscribe, and of course you can find the link to this work in the description below.